Atlanta's night sky shimmered with ambition. Beneath its glow, families like the Mitchells carried names carved in history, names spoken with respect, with envy, with reverence. And at the center of that legacy stood a man who thought he had it all. Darius Mitchell, the son of a giant, the heir to a legacy, a man molded by discipline, faith, and the unshakable hand of his father. To the world he was untouchable, educated, successful, destined to lead. To his family he was the promise of tomorrow. But promises can rot. And the people closest to you? They don't always guard your heart. Sometimes they sharpen the knives. On the eve of what should have been the happiest day of his life, Darius would discover a truth that no man is ever prepared to bear. A betrayal so deep, it would not only shatter his trust, it would shake the very foundation of his bloodline. This is not just a story about love gone wrong. It is not just a story about family secrets. It is a story of a man stripped to the bone by lies, yet daring to rise again. Because when betrayal comes from the one you love, and the father you trusted, what's left of you when the smoke clears? Before we begin, tell me this in the comments. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart? Where are you watching from, and how would you handle what Darius is about to face? The story of Darius Mitchell did not begin in the tall glass towers of Atlanta or the sleek streets of Buckhead. It began in the heart of Decatur, Georgia, a place where red clay roads told stories of struggle and resilience, and where the Mitchell name carried a weight of honor. Darius was born into a family that understood both pride and pain. His father, Harold Mitchell, was not just a man, he was a presence. At 62, Harold was a towering figure with salt and pepper hair and a voice that commanded rooms without shouting. He had built a real estate empire from scratch, transforming rundown blocks into thriving communities, earning both wealth and respect in Atlanta's black business circles. Harold's reputation was twofold: a shrewd businessman in boardrooms and a man of deep generosity in church pews. For 3 decades, his name was whispered with reverence by men who wanted to be him and women who admired the loyalty he seemed to show his wife, Lorraine. Lorraine was Harold's steady anchor. Elegant, dignified, and faithful to the core, she raised Darius and his 2 younger sisters with grace. She worked as an elementary school teacher, instilling in her children not just knowledge but values, honor, respect, and faith in God. Together, Harold and Lorraine were seen as the model black couple in their community, a living example of what commitment and hard work could build. For Darius, his father wasn't just Harold Mitchell, he was everything. The man he wanted to be, the standard by which he measured his own manhood. From an early age, Darius followed Harold everywhere. When Harold walked into business meetings, little Darius would trail behind, watching how his father shook hands with confidence, how he listened before he spoke, how people leaned forward when he offered advice. In church, Darius admired the way Harold would stand tall, ushering the congregation, always the example of dignity. There was one memory etched deep into Darius's mind. He was just 12 when a storm ripped the roof off their neighbor's home. Instead of sending workers, Harold himself climbed a ladder, hammering down tarps in the pouring rain, his shirt plastered to his chest. A man, Harold told him that night, isn't measured by how much money he makes, but by how he uses that money to lift others. Those words sank into Darius's bones and stayed there. By the time Darius turned 18, he had already made a promise to himself. He would carry the Mitchell legacy forward, not just in business but in character. He attended Morehouse College, where he studied computer science and business, determined to blend his father's entrepreneurial fire with his own love for technology. At Morehouse, Darius stood out, not just for his sharp mind but for his discipline. While others partied, he built coding projects, interned at firms, and mapped out his future. His professors spoke of him with pride. His classmates envied his focus. But it wasn't arrogance, it was responsibility. Darius knew the Mitchell name wasn't just his. It was a crown he had to polish. When he graduated, he didn't waste time chasing clout. He went straight into consulting, where his ability to lead projects, manage crises, and inspire teams made him a star. At 34, he wasn't just successful, he was admired. His Buckhead condo, his Range Rover, and his tailored suits were symbols not of vanity but of arrival. He had built a life worthy of the Mitchell name. And yet, despite all the success, Darius remained humble. He still returned to Decatur every Sunday to eat his mama's collard greens and cornbread, still slipped envelopes into the church donation basket, still let neighborhood kids sit on his lap as he showed them how to use his laptop. To the world he was a man of prestige. To those who knew him he was a man of heart. But there was one thing Darius didn't know, one truth hidden in the shadows of the Mitchell name. For all the pride he carried, for all the lessons Harold had poured into him, there was a crack in the foundation. Harold was not the flawless man Darius believed him to be. The mask of respect and loyalty Harold wore so well was hiding a secret that, one day, would devastate everything Darius thought he knew about family, love, and trust. The legacy he cherished was built on soil far more fragile than he realized. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from right now? And tell me in the comments, have you ever looked up to someone, only to later discover they weren't who you thought they were? Atlanta pulsed like a living organism, its skyline crowned with towers of ambition, its streets humming with a rhythm that blended old Southern soul with modern hustle. And in the middle of it all stood Darius Mitchell, a man who had taken the foundation laid in Decatur and built upon it with precision, discipline, and relentless drive. By 34, Darius was the kind of man who made people turn their heads without meaning to. He didn't carry himself with arrogance, but with a quiet authority that spoke louder than any words. His suits, tailored Italian cuts in charcoal, navy, and black, were not just clothes but armor. His Range Rover, gleaming obsidian under Atlanta's sun, was less a show of wealth and more a declaration. The Mitchell legacy was alive, thriving, and unstoppable. But beneath the image of success was a man shaped by long nights and sacrifices. After graduating from Morehouse, Darius had entered the world of corporate consulting, where the pressure was unforgiving and the rewards intoxicating. He rose quickly, not because he was the loudest in the room, but because he was the one who listened longest and spoke sharpest. Senior partners came to respect him. Clients sought his counsel. He was the man called in when projects were failing, when millions were on the line, when leadership was crumbling. What set Darius apart was his ability to command trust. He had a calmness that steadied rooms filled with chaos, a discipline that made him reliable, and an integrity that drew loyalty. In a world where shortcuts were often rewarded, Darius chose the long path. He worked harder, prepared deeper, and delivered better. His name became synonymous with results. His condo in Buckhead reflected both his taste and his philosophy. Perched on the 22nd floor, it offered a sweeping view of Atlanta, lights stretching across the horizon like possibilities waiting to be seized. Inside, it was modern yet understated. Exposed brick walls that gave a nod to heritage, sleek leather furniture, shelves lined with books on leadership, technology, and history. No clutter. No excess. Every detail intentional, every piece a reflection of discipline. But the condo was more than a home, it was a sanctuary. At night, when the city's buzz softened, Darius would stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows, drink in hand, staring at the city he was helping shape. He often thought of his father, Harold. A man isn't measured by what he has, Harold had told him, but by what he leaves behind. That mantra burned inside Darius. Every contract he signed, every deal he secured, every life he touched through mentorship or charity, it was all for something bigger than himself. Darius wasn't just living for today. He was building tomorrow. He never forgot Decatur. On Sundays, he drove down in casual clothes, visiting Lorraine, eating her collard greens and cornbread as if success hadn't changed a thing. He still slipped quiet envelopes into the church offering plate, still answered phone calls from neighbors needing advice. The Mitchell name meant something there, and Darius wore it like a crown he dared not tarnish. Yet, for all the accolades and stability, Darius was not a man without burdens. Success had made him cautious. His friendships were few but loyal. He had dated, yes, but never recklessly. Women admired his discipline, his ambition, his poise. But Darius was wary of anyone who seemed too attracted to the Mitchell name rather than the man himself. Trust, for him, was not given easily, it was earned just as his father had taught him. Still, there were moments when loneliness crept in. Nights when the city lights outside his condo felt like reminders of what he hadn't yet built, a family of his own. Sometimes he wondered if he was too disciplined, too careful, too focused on legacy. But then he'd hear his father's voice in his head, telling him that timing was everything. He convinced himself that when the right woman came along he'd know. In his career, Darius was beginning to branch out. Consulting was lucrative, but he wanted more. He began investing in startups, young black entrepreneurs who reminded him of Harold in his early days. He didn't just give money, he gave mentorship, structure, and vision. One of his ments, a 26-year-old app developer from East Point, often told people, "Darius didn't just invest in my idea. He invested in me." That was the kind of impact Darius wanted, not quick profits but legacies seeded in others. He had become more than Harold's son. He had become a name of his own. Still, the shadow of his father's reputation loomed large. In every handshake, every introduction, every meeting, Darius carried Harold with him. People didn't just see Darius, they saw Harold's bloodline. It was a source of pride but also a weight. Because Darius couldn't know, that the man he idolized wasn't the man the world thought him to be. For now, in this chapter of his life, Darius was at his peak, young, successful, admired, and disciplined. A proud black man standing tall in Atlanta's skyline, embodying the very best of what his community hoped for and what his family had instilled. But pride, when built on hidden cracks, can become fragile. And in the quiet hours of night, when Darius stood at his window, staring at the glowing city below, fate was already preparing storms he could not yet see. The night of the Morehouse alumni banquet was alive with laughter, brass horns, and the hum of stories told by men who had once walked the same halls, shared the same struggles, and dreamed the same dreams. Darius Mitchell, as always, carried himself with quiet poise. His tailored navy suit hugged broad shoulders shaped by years of gym discipline, and his polished shoes reflected the ballroom's chandelier lights. He had attended enough banquets to know the rhythm of the night, shaking hands, trading updates, raising glasses. But this night would prove different. This night, Jasmine Turner appeared. She entered the ballroom with a kind of presence that seemed effortless, like the air shifted when she walked in. Jasmine wasn't the loudest, nor did she try to command attention. But her elegance drew eyes all the same. She wore a sleek black gown, her natural curls pinned up in a crown that framed her face with both regality and softness. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, scanned the room with the confidence of a woman who knew she belonged anywhere she stepped. Darius noticed her almost instantly. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because there was something about her energy that was magnetic. When she laughed at a joke across the table, it wasn't practiced or calculated. It was genuine, warm, disarming. For a man like Darius, who had grown wary of superficial charms, authenticity was the rarest jewel. Their first interaction came over something simple. She was reaching for a glass of sparkling water at the refreshment table when their hands brushed. "Sorry," she said, smiling, her voice carrying a melodic softness. "No need to apologize," Darius replied, returning the smile. "I was taught a gentleman never lets a lady pour her own drink anyway." He poured her glass, handing it over with the ease of a man who had been raised on manners. "Thank you," she tilted her head. "Darius Mitchell. Morehouse, class of '08. Her eyes lit up. "Mitchell. That name carries weight. I've heard it more than once tonight." "Jasmine Turner, Spelman, class of '10. That introduction opened the door to a conversation that carried them well past the appetizers and into the heart of the evening. Jasmine wasn't just beautiful, she was razor-sharp. A corporate attorney with her own budding practice, she spoke of her work with a passion that made Darius lean in. She had grit, drive, and ambition, but none of it felt like competition. It felt like alignment. "Too many times we wait for permission," she said at one point, her tone firm. "I decided early I wasn't waiting for anyone to hand me a seat at the table. I'd build my own table if I had to." Darius felt something stir in him. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition. Jasmine carried the same fire, the same discipline, the same refusal to let circumstance define her path. In her he saw a mirror. As the evening unfolded, their chemistry was undeniable. He asked questions that went deeper than surface pleasantries. She listened, not just with her ears but with her eyes, the way people do when they're truly present. When the band shifted into slow jazz and couples drifted to the dance floor, Jasmine gave Darius a look that invited, yet tested. "You dance?" she asked. "I move," he said, grinning. He guided her to the floor, his hand resting respectfully on her waist, hers brushing lightly against his shoulder. They swayed, their conversation pausing, silence filling in where words weren't needed. The room blurred around them. For that moment, it was just Darius and Jasmine, two lives on different tracks suddenly colliding in perfect rhythm. After the banquet, they lingered in the hotel lobby, unwilling to let the night end. Their conversation drifted from careers to family, from goals to dreams. Jasmine spoke of her parents, her mother, a retired nurse, and her father, a postal worker who had taught her discipline by waking her at dawn every morning. Darius, in turn, spoke of Harold and Lorraine, of his sisters, of the weight of legacy he carried. "You know what I like about you?" Jasmine said softly, her eyes narrowing as though she was studying him. "What's that?" "You're proud but not arrogant. You wear responsibility like it's a tailored suit. I respect that." It wasn't flattery, it was truth. And that truth hit Darius in a way compliments rarely did. By the time they exchanged numbers, there was already a current between them, unspoken but undeniable. The next days turned into phone calls, then dinners, then walks through Piedmont Park where conversations stretched into the night. Jasmine wasn't like the women Darius had dated before. She didn't orbit his success, she carried her own. She challenged him, questioned him, inspired him. And for a man so disciplined, so guarded, it was refreshing, intoxicating even to let someone in. Their romance moved quickly, almost too quickly. But it didn't feel rushed. It felt inevitable, like two rivers finally converging after winding through separate valleys. They were seen together at galas, fundraisers, and rooftop dinners, and whispers began to follow them. Darius has finally met his match. But in private, away from the eyes of Atlanta's elite, their moments were even more powerful. Nights cooking in Darius's condo, Jasmine barefoot in his kitchen, teasing him about how he chopped onions too slowly. Afternoons in her office, where she let him read through her legal drafts and give feedback. They weren't just lovers, they were partners in ambition, sharpening each other like steel on steel. For Darius, it felt like the missing piece of his life had fallen into place. He had built the career, the reputation, the lifestyle. Now, with Jasmine by his side, he could envision something greater, something lasting. But love, no matter how strong at the start, does not always protect against the fractures hidden beneath the surface. And neither of them knew yet that their whirlwind romance was standing on a foundation already cracked by secrets long buried. Sundays in Decatur were sacred for the Mitchells. No matter how far Darius's career pulled him into the heart of Atlanta, no matter what deadlines loomed or deals dangled, he always returned home on Sundays. Lorraine's cooking was more than food, it was ritual, history, communion. The smell of collard greens, cornbread, and baked chicken filled the house long before church had even ended, and it was around that dining room table that the Mitchell family's bonds were reaffirmed week after week. The first Sunday Jasmine joined them, the air in the Mitchell household carried its usual rhythm, gospel humming from the kitchen radio, laughter from Darius's sisters as they set the table, the clinking of dishes, the warmth of familiarity. But there was also a hum of curiosity. Who was this woman who had so quickly captured Darius's attention? Lorraine was the first to greet her. Dressed in her Sunday best, pearls around her neck, she opened the door with the poise of a woman who had seen many young women come and go in her son's life. But Jasmine wasn't like the others. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jasmine said, extending her hand with both respect and confidence, "thank you for having me." Lorraine took her hand, studying her face, her posture, the way she carried herself. Then, with a smile that was both motherly and approving, she pulled Jasmine into a hug. "If you're with my son, baby, you don't have to thank me. You're already family." The words disarmed Jasmine, and Darius, standing just behind her, felt the quiet release of a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His mother's approval mattered more than any contract he could sign. Inside, the sisters were next. Nadine, the oldest, a sharp-tongued attorney herself, was the first to test Jasmine. "So," she asked over the pouring of sweet tea, "how do you keep up with my brother's schedule? He's not exactly a man of leisure." Jasmine didn't flinch. She laughed, sliding easily into the rhythm. "I don't keep up, I set my own pace. If he can keep up with me, then we're even." The sisters laughed, and just like that, the ice was broken. By the time dinner was served, Jasmine was helping Lorraine carry dishes, swapping recipes with Nadine, and listening intently as the youngest, Michelle, shared stories from her graduate program. But the most surprising reaction came from Harold. When Jasmine extended her hand to greet him, Harold didn't just shake it. He held it, his eyes studying her in a way that lingered. "Jasmine Turner," he said, his voice deep, familiar, commanding. "That's a strong name." "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell," Jasmine replied, her smile polite but steady. "Call me Harold," he said, smiling warmly, almost too warmly. "Any woman who makes my son smile like that is more than welcome here." The comment drew laughter from the table, but Darius caught something in his father's tone, something that sat just a beat longer than necessary. Still, he brushed it aside. He was too proud, too happy in the moment to question it. As the meal went on, Jasmine seemed to weave herself seamlessly into the fabric of the family. She praised Lorraine's cooking, asked Nadine about her latest cases, encouraged Michelle about her studies. She even found common ground with Harold, listening intently as he recounted a story about his early days in real estate. "You remind me of myself, Jasmine," Harold said, his eyes glinting with nostalgia. "Ambitious. Determined. I like that." Jasmine thanked him, and though the moment passed smoothly, Lorraine caught the way Harold's gaze lingered a second longer than it should have. She said nothing, only filed the observation away. Mothers often noticed what others missed. By the end of the evening, Jasmine wasn't just a guest, she was family. Lorraine hugged her as though she'd been at the table for years. Nadine offered her number, saying they should meet for lunch sometime. Michelle shyly asked if Jasmine could look over her resume. Even Harold, as they walked her to the door, patted her shoulder warmly. "You're good for him," Harold said quietly, his smile warm, his eyes unreadable. In the car, as they drove back to Atlanta, Darius reached for Jasmine's hand. "You were perfect tonight," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I've never seen my family take to anyone like that before." Jasmine squeezed his hand back, her eyes glowing with a mixture of happiness and relief. "It felt like home. Like I've known them all my life." Darius smiled, his chest swelling with a mix of gratitude and destiny. For the first time he allowed himself to believe that everything in his life, his career, his discipline, his legacy, was finally aligning with his heart. What he didn't know was that Harold's warmth toward Jasmine wasn't just fatherly approval. It was a seed of something far more dangerous, something that would, in time, crack open and shake the very core of the Mitchell family. For now, though, the picture was perfect. The Mitchells gathered around their Sunday table, a new face woven seamlessly into the legacy. It looked like unity. It looked like destiny. But sometimes the most beautiful pictures hide the darkest shadows. Tell me, where are you watching from right now? And have you ever met someone who fit into your family so seamlessly, it felt like they'd always belonged? Share your story in the comments. Atlanta glittered that evening, its skyline alive with lights that shimmered like diamonds scattered against velvet. Inside a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, Darius Mitchell was a man with a secret of his own. Not a hidden past, but a promise waiting to be spoken. Tonight he was going to ask Jasmine Turner to become his wife. Everything about the night was intentional. Darius had reserved the entire terrace, strings of golden lights overhead, a quartet playing soft jazz in the corner, and a private chef preparing Jasmine's favorite meal, blackened salmon with roasted asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes. On the table, a single vase held white orchids, her favorite flowers. Jasmine arrived in a flowing emerald dress that seemed to catch every glint of the city lights. When she stepped onto the terrace, her eyes widened at the sight before her. "Darius," she whispered, her voice carrying both surprise and awe. He took her hand, kissed it gently. "Tonight isn't about the view, Jasmine. It's about us." They dined, laughed, shared quiet glances that said more than words could. And when dessert arrived, a plate of chocolate mousse with the words "Will you marry me?" scripted in delicate white chocolate, Jasmine froze, her hand at her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. Darius stood, moving to her side. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee, his voice steady but filled with emotion, he said, "Jasmine Turner, from the moment I met you, I knew you weren't just someone I wanted in my life. You were someone I couldn't imagine living without. You challenge me, inspire me, complete me. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to still. For a moment there was only Jasmine, the tears spilling freely now, her lips trembling as she nodded. "Yes, Darius. 1,000 times yes." Applause erupted from the staff and musicians who had all been in on the surprise. Darius slid the diamond ring onto her finger, and Jasmine collapsed into his arms, her laughter mingling with tears, her yes echoing in the Atlanta night. The celebration that followed was just as unforgettable. Within days, news of the engagement spread through their families and circles. Lorraine wept tears of joy when Darius and Jasmine visited Decatur to share the news. "My son," she said, cupping his face, "you've chosen a woman worthy of your name." Nadine and Michelle squealed as they admired Jasmine's ring, their excitement spilling into plans for dresses, venues, and ceremonies. Even Harold raised a glass at the family dinner, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "To my son and his future bride," he declared, his deep voice carrying authority. "May this union be as strong as the legacy we stand on." But while the room cheered, Lorraine noticed again the way Harold's eyes lingered a little too long on Jasmine, a flicker of warmth that didn't feel entirely paternal. She said nothing because tonight was meant for joy. Friends poured in congratulations, social media lit up with hashtags, and the couple quickly became the image of Black excellence in Atlanta. The ambitious consultant and the brilliant attorney, engaged and destined for greatness. Their photos circulated, laughing on park benches, holding hands on rooftops, Jasmine's diamond ring catching every flash of the camera. To everyone watching they were perfect. But perfection, as it often does, carried shadows. Behind the smiles, Darius began to feel the weight of expectation. Everyone looked to him and Jasmine as proof that success, legacy and love could all coexist flawlessly. But no relationship, no matter how strong, is immune to strain. Wedding planning became both a dream and a battlefield, guest lists, budgets, competing visions. Jasmine wanted a grand affair, a wedding that would rival Atlanta's finest galas, while Darius leaned toward something elegant but understated. It wasn't a fight, not yet, but small sparks of disagreement flickered at the edges. Then there was Harold. He was unusually present in the planning process. He offered to fund part of the wedding, insisted on weighing in on venues, photographers, even the menu. It's tradition, he told Darius, for fathers to ensure the day is perfect. But sometimes his interest seemed too focused on Jasmine. Compliments that lingered, conversations where his hand brushed her shoulder just a little too comfortably, a smile that hovered just a beat too long. Jasmine laughed them off. "Your dad is just old-school charming," she told Darius when he asked. "It's harmless." But Darius's instincts tensed, if only for a moment. He didn't press it. He trusted his father too much. The engagement parties rolled on, champagne flowing, friends and family gathering to celebrate. From the outside, theirs was the kind of love story people envied. Two accomplished black professionals, deeply in love, supported by proud families. And in many ways it was real. Darius adored Jasmine, and Jasmine cherished Darius. Yet the cracks had begun to show. Not obvious ones, just hairline fractures, small enough to ignore in the glow of celebration. But time and pressure have a way of widening even the smallest cracks. For now, though, the dream held. The wedding date was set, the invitations designed, the future shimmering before them like Atlanta's skyline at night. It was a picture of perfection. But pictures, no matter how beautiful, can never tell the whole story. Because behind every celebration, there are truths waiting in the shadows. And sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones holding the secrets that can shatter everything. Atlanta had not seen a wedding like this in decades. From the moment Darius and Jasmine announced their date, the city's most influential circles buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just another union, it was the merging of legacies, the son of Harold Mitchell, a man whose name carried weight in both boardrooms and church pews, and Jasmine Turner, the radiant young attorney rising swiftly through Atlanta's legal corridors. The venue itself spoke volumes. Ebenezer Baptist Church, steeped in history, chosen not merely for its grandeur but for its symbolism. A place where generations had prayed, marched, and buried their heroes, now draped in white lilies and golden drapery. The stained glass windows cast kaleidoscopes of color onto the pews, making every guest feel as though they were sitting inside a sacred jewel box. No corner of the planning had been spared detail. The guest list was curated like a hall of fame. CEOs, judges, pastors, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and even a sprinkling of celebrities. Lorraine whispered to Nadine that it felt more like a gala than a wedding. "Atlanta's black royalty is here tonight," she said, her voice both proud and nervous. The reception was set for the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, transformed into a vision of black excellence. Black-owned caterers prepared dishes blending Southern tradition with fine dining, shrimp and grits plated with truffle essence, collard greens folded into phyllo as savory bites, sweet potato soufflé presented in crystal stemware. Every vendor, from the florist to the band, had been handpicked not only for their skill but for what they represented. The excellence of a people who had built beauty from resilience. Jasmine dazzled in her Vera Wang gown, a cascade of ivory satin with intricate lacework that hugged her figure before flowing into a train that seemed to stretch into history itself. A jeweled tiara rested against her softly curled hair, catching every flicker of light. As she stepped into the sanctuary, holding tightly to her father's arm, a collective breath rippled through the crowd. For a moment, the sanctuary was silent, awed, reverent, as if heaven itself paused to witness. Darius stood at the altar in a custom-tailored tuxedo, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might echo in the rafters. When Jasmine's eyes met his, the weight of years, expectations, and love all collided in that single gaze. He smiled and she smiled back, and the world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them. The vows were poetry. Darius spoke of loyalty, honor, and building a life worthy of their ancestors' sacrifices. Jasmine promised devotion, partnership, and love unshaken by storms. Applause thundered when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and their kiss was met with a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundation of Ebenezer. The reception glittered with laughter and music. A 12-piece band filled the ballroom with soulful renditions of classics, while guests toasted the couple with champagne and raised their voices in celebration. Jasmine twirled across the floor in Darius's arms, her dress sweeping in perfect circles, her laughter carrying like a bell above the music. Cameras flashed and every angle captured perfection. But beneath the golden sheen, shadows stirred. Lorraine, sipping her champagne, noticed again the way Harold's gaze followed Jasmine. He leaned in too close when he congratulated her, his hand resting on her back just a little too long. "You've made our family proud," he told her with a smile that lingered too warmly. Jasmine laughed it off, brushing his words as harmless charm, but Lorraine's stomach knotted. She knew Harold's patterns. She had seen this before. Darius, swept up in handshakes and backslaps, missed the subtleties. To him the night was flawless. A perfect union, a perfect reception, a perfect future. When he raised his glass to toast his bride, his words drew tears from every corner of the room. "To Jasmine," he declared, his voice strong. "My partner, my heart, my forever. May our love be the kind that inspires generations." The ballroom roared in response. Crystal clinked, music swelled, and Jasmine leaned into his shoulder, the picture of a woman who had it all. Yet in the corner, unseen by most, Harold's eyes did not rest on the grandeur of the night, nor on the wealth gathered in the room. They rested on Jasmine, his expression a mask of paternal pride to anyone watching, yet weighted with something else entirely when he thought no one saw. And so, the night that Atlanta would remember as the wedding of the year, closed in splendor. Photographs filled magazines, hashtags trended, and the Mitchell family name glittered brighter than ever. But for all its beauty, history teaches one truth: even the grandest celebrations can hide the first whispers of tragedy. Because behind the chandeliers and champagne flutes, the seeds of betrayal had already been planted. And they were waiting quietly to grow. The Ritz-Carlton's presidential suite gleamed with understated luxury, mahogany paneling, soft golden light spilling from antique lamps, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Atlanta's skyline, where the city shimmered like a bed of diamonds scattered across velvet. The night was quiet, yet charged with expectation. Tomorrow the Mitchell name would ring louder than ever before. Darius stood at the window, staring down at the streets of Buckhead. From this height, the cars below looked like toy figurines, their headlights tracing lazy patterns across Peachtree Road. His reflection in the glass was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a perfectly cut tuxedo he had just finished trying on one last time. But beneath the polished surface was a man carrying the weight of legacy. His father's legacy. Behind him, Harold Mitchell was pouring bourbon into 2 crystal tumblers. He moved slowly, deliberately, as though the simple act of measuring amber liquid was part of some ceremony. The man carried himself the same way he always had, commanding, deliberate, larger than life even in the stillness of a hotel suite. "Son," Harold said, handing one glass to Darius, "tomorrow's the biggest day of your life. Bigger than any deal you'll close, bigger than any house you'll buy. You're not just marrying Jasmine, you're setting the tone for the kind of man you'll be remembered as." Darius turned, taking the glass, his eyes soft with gratitude. "I know, Pop. That's why I wanted to spend tonight with you. Just you and me, no noise." They clinked glasses, the sound ringing sharp in the quiet room. They both sipped, the burn of bourbon settling into their chests. For a while they sat together in the leather chairs by the fireplace, the silence between them not heavy but full, like a bond carved over decades. "You've done good, boy," Harold finally said, leaning back. His salt and pepper hair glowed in the lamplight, his voice steady, layered with pride. "Look around you. That skyline? That's yours. You've built yourself into a man people respect. Not many fathers get to sit here looking their son in the eye, and know the next generation is ready to carry the torch." Darius's throat tightened. Growing up, Harold hadn't always been gentle. He was a disciplinarian, a man who expected excellence and settled for nothing less. There were years Darius resented it: missed ball games, curfews enforced with iron rules, lectures that felt like interrogations. But tonight, every scar of discipline felt like it had shaped him for this moment. "I couldn't have done any of it without you," Darius said. "You taught me how to carry myself, how to think bigger than what's in front of me. You showed me what it means to be a Mitchell." Harold smiled faintly, a rare softness crossing his face. "And now tomorrow you'll show Jasmine. A wife isn't just a partner, son. She's a reflection. The world will judge you by how you treat her, how you protect her, and how you honor her." The words sank deep and Darius nodded. "I love her, Pop. More than I thought I could love anyone. She makes me want to be better." Harold studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. His grip was firm, almost unshakable. "Hold on to that, Darius. Love will test you. Loyalty will test you. And temptation." His voice trailed off, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. Temptation will test you hardest of all. Darius chuckled lightly, missing the undercurrent in his father's tone. I don't worry about temptation. Jasmine's it for me. No one else comes close. But Harold's gaze lingered on the rim of his glass. He swirled the bourbon slowly, watching the liquid catch the light. I hope so, he murmured. The conversation shifted then, drifting into laughter and nostalgia. They spoke of Darius's childhood, Harold retelling the story of teaching him to ride a bike in the church parking lot, the day he brought home his first report card with straight A's, the first time he walked into Harold's office downtown and announced he wanted to build his own empire one day. Each memory wove them closer, stitching father and son together like a quilt made of shared years. For Darius the night was perfect, a moment he knew he would carry forever. Hours passed and the bourbon loosened Harold's tongue. His laughter grew deeper, his stories longer. At one point he stood by the window staring at the city lights with a strange, almost haunted expression. You ever wonder, son, Harold said quietly, whether a man can build everything right only to watch it crumble from the inside? Darius frowned. What do you mean? Nothing, Harold said quickly, forcing a smile. Just an old man thinking too much. Forget it. But the words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and lingering. By midnight, their laughter had softened into comfortable silence. Darius rose first, clapping his father on the back. I'm glad we had tonight. Tomorrow's going to be perfect. Harold nodded, smiling with pride that didn't quite reach his eyes. Tomorrow will change everything, son. Everything. Darius left for his adjoining suite, his heart light, his faith in his father unshakable. But Harold stayed awake, staring out at the city long after the lights dimmed. His reflection in the glass looked older, wearier, and yet, behind his eyes, something stirred. A hunger he could not name. A weakness he thought he'd buried years ago. He raised his half-empty glass, whispering to the skyline. God help me. Because in less than 24 hours, fate would put his bond with his son to a test no bourbon, no laughter, no legacy could withstand. The suite was still scented with jasmine candles from the night before. Darius had risen early, restless, his body still humming from the anticipation of what was supposed to be the happiest weekend of his life. Tomorrow he would stand in Ebenezer Baptist Church and pledge forever to the woman he loved. But for now he was alone. Jasmine had left her bag in the room when she went down to meet her bridesmaids for breakfast, and Harold had gone out for a morning walk, claiming he needed to clear his head before all the noise. Darius sat on the edge of the bed, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He leaned back, letting his head sink into the pillow, smiling at the thought of how perfect Jasmine had looked in her dress rehearsal. She was everything he wanted. His partner, his equal, the woman who would stand beside him as they built an empire. That's when it happened. A soft buzz vibrated against the wooden nightstand. Darius frowned and glanced over. His father's phone lit up, face down, screen glowing. Harold had left it behind. The phone buzzed again. Then again. The sound was sharp, insistent, like a knock on a door that refused to be ignored. Darius picked it up absent-mindedly, intending only to silence it. But then the name flashed across the screen. Jasmine. His stomach tightened. At first, he told himself it was nothing. Maybe she was confirming some detail about the rehearsal dinner with Harold, something about seating or flowers. But then the phone buzzed again. And again. And this time, the preview of the text appeared before he could look away. I missed last night already. You make me feel alive in ways he never could. The words hit him like a hammer. His heart stuttered, his mouth went dry. He stared at the glowing rectangle in his hand, the letters burning into his eyes. His first instinct was denial. This had to be a mistake, a wrong number, maybe even a cruel joke. But the phone buzzed again and this time a photo appeared. It was Jasmine. Not staged, not innocent. Intimate. The silk robe he had seen her slip into just last night. The familiar curve of her lips. The unmistakable intimacy of the message. And worse, her hand pressed against the chest of a man who was not him. A man whose watch he recognized. His father's watch. Darius dropped the phone as though it had burned him. It clattered onto the nightstand, the screen still glowing, still alive with betrayal. His breath came hard, shallow, his chest aching as if he'd run a marathon. He paced the room, clutching his head, fighting to make sense of what he had just seen. His father. His bride. Together. The bourbon-soaked laughter from last night rang in his ears. Harold's hand on his shoulder. His father's words about love, loyalty, and temptation. Suddenly they felt poisoned. No, Darius whispered to himself, shaking his head violently. This ain't real. It can't be. But the phone buzzed again. Another message. Another affirmation that the nightmare was true. Same place tonight? Before everything begins. Darius sank onto the bed, gripping the sheets with both fists, his knuckles white. The weight of it pressed down on him like concrete. His world, once so carefully built, was collapsing in slow motion. He thought of Jasmine's smile, the way she leaned on him, the promises she made. He thought of Harold, the man who had shaped him, who had poured wisdom and pride into him just hours ago. Two people he trusted most, bound together by betrayal so intimate it made him want to tear the walls down around him. Rage surged through him, hot and blinding. He picked up the phone again, scrolling, his hands trembling. Message after message confirmed the affair. Long threads of secret words, stolen nights, whispered promises meant for his father, not for him. The photo was the worst. Her face lit with a smile she'd never given him, her body draped across sheets he didn't recognize. And Harold, his father, his blood, was there in every line between the words. Darius felt his chest cave in. He pressed his palms against his eyes until stars burst in the darkness. How could this be? How could the two people who meant the most be the ones to destroy him? The sound of the keycard sliding into the suite's door lock jolted him. The door opened and Harold stepped in, casual in his workout clothes, a towel draped around his neck. He froze when he saw Darius, the phone clenched in his hand, the screen still lit with Jasmine's last message. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was sharp, suffocating. Then Darius rose, his body trembling with a fury he could barely contain. His voice cracked as he spoke. How long, Pop? Harold's jaw tightened. He set the towel down slowly, carefully, like a man trying to calm a wild animal. Son, listen. Don't call me that. Darius roared, his voice echoing off the suite's walls. He slammed the phone onto the table so hard the glass cracked. How long? Harold swallowed, his eyes flickering with something, shame maybe or fear. But Darius didn't care. The man he had admired, the man he had loved, was gone. In his place stood a traitor in gym clothes, sweating under the weight of his own sins. Darius felt his knees weaken, the strength draining from him. He stumbled back toward the window, staring out at the glittering city. Just hours ago it had looked like his empire. Now it looked like a graveyard. His voice dropped, hoarse, broken. You? Of all people, you? Harold opened his mouth to answer, but the words never came. And in that hollow silence, Darius knew one truth. Tomorrow's wedding was not the beginning of his forever. It was the battlefield where betrayal would be dragged into the light. The city had long since quieted, but inside the Ritz-Carlton suite, Darius Mitchell sat awake, staring into the dark. The clock ticked past midnight, every second echoing louder than the last. Sleep was impossible. His chest still ached from the betrayal, but the tears had dried hours ago, leaving behind something sharper. He thought of Harold's silence when confronted, the cowardice of a man who couldn't even defend his sins. He thought of Jasmine's lies, the way she kissed him goodnight while sending her father-in-law messages of lust. And he thought of tomorrow, the day the world would celebrate their union. A union built on deceit. No. If Harold and Jasmine thought their betrayal would remain hidden under polished smiles and rehearsed vows, they were mistaken. Darius opened his laptop, his fingers trembling as he powered it on. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, hollowed and hardened. He took a deep breath, and for the first time since discovering the truth, he felt steady. He wasn't going to scream. He wasn't going to fight in hotel rooms. He wasn't even going to confront Jasmine tonight. No, his revenge would be public. Sure. Surgical. The plan began to take shape in his mind like architecture. He scrolled through Harold's phone again, each message a knife. He transferred them to his computer. Screenshots of Jasmine's texts, the photo that had burned his soul, the time-stamped evidence no one could deny. Each file felt like a brick in the case he was building, proof that betrayal had not been imagined but carved into digital stone. Hours slipped by as he arranged everything into a hidden web page. The design was simple. Black background, white text, each screenshot stacked neatly like a gallery of wounds. He gave it a title, The Truth They Hid. When he was finished, he sat back in his chair, staring at the page. It was devastating. Not just to him, but to the Mitchell family name, to Jasmine's rising career, to Harold's carefully curated reputation. This wasn't just betrayal, it was scandal, and tomorrow the whole city would see it. But how to reveal it? How to force every guest at the wedding to look the truth in the eye? That's when the idea came. A QR code. Clean. Silent. Unstoppable. He generated it with a few clicks, the black and white square appearing on his screen like a cipher to destruction. Anyone who scanned it would see everything. Every text. Every photo. Every lie. By 3 a.m., Darius was printing. On the hotel's business center printer, he ran off card after card, each one stamped with the QR code in bold black. No explanation, no words. Just a doorway to the truth. The rhythmic whir of the machine was almost soothing, like the sound of an executioner sharpening his blade. Each card that slid into the tray was another nail in the coffin of Harold and Jasmine's secret. Darius stacked them carefully, methodically. His movements were precise, his mind locked in on the goal. The pain was still there, but it had transformed into something else. A quiet fury, disciplined and unrelenting. At one point he caught his reflection in the printer's glass. His eyes looked different. Not the eyes of the man who laughed with his father over bourbon just hours ago. Not the eyes of the groom who had believed in forever. These were the eyes of a man reborn in betrayal, forged in fire. He gathered the cards into a leather satchel and returned to his suite. The city outside was beginning to lighten, the first whispers of dawn stretching across the skyline. For a moment, Darius stood at the window, watching the horizon shift from black to gray to the faintest pink. He thought about what tomorrow would bring, the gasps, the whispers, the shock that would ripple through the pews of Ebenezer. He imagined Lorraine's face, Nadine's tears, the congregation stunned into silence. He imagined Jasmine's perfect smile crumbling in real time. And Harold. He closed his eyes, picturing his father's expression when the truth unfolded. Would it be shame? Anger? Would he try to deny it? It didn't matter. The evidence spoke for itself. Darius whispered to the glass, to the city, to himself, "You taught me how to fight, Pop. Now I'm fighting back." By sunrise, the satchel of cards sat neatly by the door, ready to be distributed. Darius finally lay down, exhaustion pressing against his body, but his mind remained sharp. The wedding would proceed, but not as anyone expected. For the rest of the world it would be a ceremony of love. For Darius it would be the unveiling of truth. And for Harold and Jasmine, it would be Judgment Day. Ebenezer Baptist Church had never gleamed brighter. Morning sunlight poured through its stained glass windows, painting the sanctuary in blues, reds, and golds. The pews were filled with Atlanta's black elite, judges in tailored suits, entrepreneurs in silk ties, politicians shaking hands with pastors, and families who had known the Mitchells for generations. The air itself seemed electric, charged with anticipation. A string quartet played softly from the loft, their bows gliding across violins with elegance, while ushers moved guests into their seats. Whispered conversations floated through the church. Admiration for Jasmine's beauty, praise for Darius's success, speculation about what kind of empire they would build together. This was not just a wedding, it was a showcase. A moment of black excellence, tradition, and legacy, unfolding in front of hundreds of eyes. Lorraine Mitchell sat in the second pew, her hat tipped slightly to the side, a regal silhouette of composure. Her daughters sat beside her, glowing with pride. But Lorraine's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her stomach knotted with a feeling she could not name. Something about Harold's energy unsettled her, though she forced a smile whenever a guest leaned close to greet her. And Harold, her husband, sat tall and beaming, his hand resting easily on his knee, his eyes following every movement at the altar. He looked like a man watching his son step into destiny. No one could have guessed the truth lurking behind his proud smile. Then the music shifted. The organ swelled and every head turned. Jasmine appeared at the doors, radiant in her white gown, her arm looped through her father's. Gasps rippled through the sanctuary. She was breathtaking. The train of her dress flowed behind her like a river of silk, her veil catching the sunlight like spun glass. Darius stood at the altar, his face calm, his body steady. Only those who knew him well might have noticed the stillness in his eyes, a stillness not born of nerves but of resolve. His satchel of cards was already empty. The QR codes had been distributed, slipped quietly into programs, tucked into hymnals, left neatly on seats. The trap was laid. As Jasmine walked the aisle, every camera phone rose, every eye wet with admiration. Guests whispered, "She's perfect. They're the couple of the year. This is history in the making." But to Darius, each step Jasmine took was a lie marching toward him. He watched her, not with the awe of a groom, but with the cold clarity of a man who had seen her true face only hours before. The pastor greeted them warmly at the altar, his voice booming with reverence. "We gather here today to celebrate the union of Darius Mitchell and Jasmine Turner." The words rolled over the crowd like a blessing. Jasmine squeezed Darius's hand, her smile flawless, her eyes sparkling with staged devotion. Harold's chest swelled with pride as he nodded approvingly, a father watching his son's dream unfold. But beneath the organ music, beneath the vows rehearsed in every heart, lay the silent hum of inevitability. The guests didn't know it yet, but the truth sat in their hands, waiting to be scanned, waiting to turn perfection into ashes. When Jasmine's father lifted her veil, the church sighed in unison. Darius leaned forward, brushing her cheek with a kiss as cameras clicked. The pastor began the vows and everything moved with choreographed beauty. To the world it was flawless. To Darius it was theater. And as he spoke his vows, strong, steady, even tender, his heart carried another truth. Soon the very people applauding would gasp in horror. Soon the masks would fall. Now pause for a moment. If you were in Darius's shoes, what would you do? Would you walk away quietly, or would you let the truth explode in front of everyone? Tell me in the comments because your answer might surprise you. It began quietly, like the faint rustle of leaves in a breeze. The pastor's voice filled the sanctuary as he guided Darius and Jasmine through the vows. Jasmine smiled, her hand trembling slightly in his. To the untrained eye it looked like nerves. To Darius it was proof of her guilt, a crack she could not disguise. Then, almost unnoticed at first, someone in the third pew tilted their program. Their phone camera hovered, scanning the strange black and white square printed neatly at the bottom corner. A QR code. Click. The guest's brow furrowed as the page loaded. Their smile collapsed. A sharp inhale cut the silence of the pew. Another scan. Another gasp. Screens began to glow throughout the sanctuary like candles flickering to life in the dark. At first it was scattered, one here, one there. But soon entire rows were alight with faces illuminated by their phones. Fingers scrolled, mouths fell open, and whispers rippled through the church like shock waves. "What is this?" someone muttered. "Oh my God," another gasped, covering her mouth. On the glowing screens truth screamed. Messages. Photos. Proof. Jasmine and Harold caught in stolen intimacy. Words that could not be misunderstood. Images that could not be excused. One by one the guests looked up, not at the couple, not at the pastor, but at Harold Mitchell, seated proudly in the front pew. Lorraine's hand trembled as she reached for her own program. She scanned. Her world crumbled in an instant. Her eyes widened, her lips parted in disbelief as the evidence flooded her screen. She turned slowly, her gaze locking on Harold. Her husband. The man she had defended, honored, and built a life beside. Her voice broke into a whisper. "No. Harold, tell me this isn't." But Harold could not meet her eyes. His proud smile faltered, replaced by a stiffness in his jaw, a shifting unease in his seat. The congregation's admiration turned to suspicion, suspicion to outrage. Gasps erupted into murmurs. Murmurs swelled into voices. The sanctuary, once filled with holy reverence, now trembled with scandal. At the altar, Jasmine's face drained of color. She saw the glow of screens, heard the whispers like daggers cutting through the air. Her body stiffened, her eyes darting wildly across the pews. She knew. She knew what they were seeing. Her gaze snapped to Darius. His expression was calm, too calm. His lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, not of joy but of justice. "Darius," she whispered, her voice cracking, her grip tightening on his hand. But Darius did not move, did not flinch, did not blink. He simply let the storm unfold. The pastor, confused, attempted to continue. "Do you, Darius Mitchell, take Jasmine Turner?" He was drowned out by the eruption. Guests stood, showing their phones to one another, exclaiming in disbelief. "Look at this. This can't be real. It's him, Harold Mitchell." A wave of shame crashed over the Mitchell family. Harold's name, once synonymous with dignity, now rolled off tongues in whispers thick with disgust. Lorraine clutched her chest, her heart hammering as tears stung her eyes. Her daughters sat frozen, their nails digging into their palms. Jasmine's father stepped forward from the front pew, confusion on his face. He grabbed Jasmine's arm. "What is going on here? What are they talking about?" Jasmine's lips quivered, but no sound came. Her silence condemned her more loudly than any words could. And Darius finally spoke. His voice rang steady through the sanctuary, silencing the chaos for a moment. "This is the truth," he said, his eyes locked on his father. "The truth you all deserve to see." Gasps gave way to stunned silence. Every ear bent toward him. Every eye flicked between the betrayed son, the trembling bride, and the disgraced father. The sanctuary was no longer a church, it was a courtroom. And the jury was everyone seated in those pews. Lorraine's sob broke through the hush, raw and aching. "How could you, Harold?" Harold sat rigid, his hand gripping the pew until his knuckles whitened. He did not answer. He could not. The whispers rose again, angrier now. With his own son's fiancée? In his own family? Unforgivable. The air thickened with judgment. The perfect image shattered. And there, in the ruins of what should have been the proudest day of his life, Darius Mitchell stood tall. Calm. Resolute. No longer the quiet heir of a legacy, but the man who would redefine it even if it meant burning it down first. The sanctuary was a storm. Guests stood and shouted, whispers colliding with accusations, disbelief tangling with rage. Phones glowed like torches in the pews, each one replaying the evidence. Harold's hands on Jasmine's waist, her lips curved in secret smiles not meant for her groom. The great Mitchell name, once revered, now buzzed in shame across screens. But amid the chaos, Darius was still. Still as stone. Still as judgment. He stepped forward. His shoes clicked against the polished wood of the altar. He turned, and with a calmness that cut sharper than any scream, he raised his hand for silence. The pastor stammered, bewildered. "Son, perhaps we should." "No," Darius's voice carried, steady and unshakable. "This is my moment. My altar. My truth." The sanctuary hushed. Even the whispers fell silent. Darius reached for the microphone, his fingers curling around the cool metal. He lifted it to his lips, his eyes sweeping across the congregation. Friends, family, business partners, elders of the community. Every one of them had come expecting perfection, and every one of them now stared into the wreckage. He began softly, but every word struck like a hammer. "Some of you have known me since I was a boy. You watched my father teach me how to walk, how to work, how to lead. You told me to follow his footsteps. And I tried. God knows I tried." His voice grew heavier. His eyes turned toward Harold, who sat stiff, his face pale beneath the weight of 100 stares. "But today the footsteps I was told to follow led me straight into betrayal." Gasps rippled again. Jasmine's breath caught. She stepped toward him, whispering urgently, "Darius, please, don't do this here. Not like this." He turned his gaze on her, eyes cold, steady, unblinking. "Not like this." His voice rose, echoing through the stained glass sanctuary. "You stood in this dress, in this church, with vows on your lips, while lying in the arms of my father. And you ask me to stay silent?" Jasmine's face crumpled, her tears breaking past the carefully painted mask of her makeup. Her father recoiled, shame flashing across his features as murmurs swirled around him. Darius lifted the microphone higher, his words slicing through the air. "To every guest here, you were invited to witness love. Instead you're witnessing truth. You see the smiles, the dresses, the chandeliers, but behind it all lies have been rotting. And today I refuse to bury them any deeper." He turned fully now, pointing his words like arrows at Harold. "You taught me to be a man of integrity. You told me respect was the foundation of a family. And yet you, my father, broke that foundation with your own hands. You took what wasn't yours. You betrayed not only me but her mother, my sisters, this entire family's name." The silence that followed was thick. Heavy. Like the church itself was holding its breath. Lorraine, trembling in the pew, pressed a hand to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. She whispered, "Lord, give me strength," as if prayer was the only anchor left in a sea of betrayal. Darius drew a long breath, his voice steady once more. "So let me make it plain, there will be no wedding. There will be no vows spoken over broken trust. Today is not a union, it is a severing. I will not bind myself to lies. Not to Jasmine. Not to Harold's shadow. Not to the weight of a legacy corrupted." The words hit like thunder. Guests exchanged looks of shock, some nodding with respect, others too stunned to speak. Jasmine's knees buckled and she dropped her bouquet onto the steps of the altar. Harold's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. His silence was its own confession. Darius straightened, his shoulders broad, his chin lifted. For the first time in his life he wasn't Harold Mitchell's son. He wasn't Jasmine's groom. He wasn't a man trapped in other people's expectations. He was free. "This," he declared, his voice ringing clear, "is the last day I let anyone define me by their lies. From this moment on, I am my own man." The microphone echoed as he set it down on the altar. A final sound, heavy with finality. The sanctuary, stunned into silence, could only watch as Darius turned and walked down the aisle, his head high, his stride steady, every step a declaration of freedom. Behind him, Jasmine sobbed into her father's arms, Harold sat hollow and disgraced, and Lorraine wept for the family she no longer recognized. But Darius didn't look back. Not once. He was no longer walking away from a wedding. He was walking into himself. If you were Darius, would you have exposed them publicly like this? Or walked away quietly and kept the family's shame a secret? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious how you would have stood at that altar. The microphone's final thud still echoed in the sanctuary when silence broke into chaos. It began with Jasmine. Her knees buckled beneath the weight of exposure, and she collapsed onto the altar steps. Her gown, so carefully pressed, so meticulously fitted, pooled around her like wilted petals. She clutched at her chest, sobs racking her body as she cried out, "Darius, please, please." Her voice cracked through the air, but her pleas fell flat against the wall of truth Darius had already built. Her father rushed forward, kneeling beside her, trying to shield her from the staring eyes and raised phones of the congregation. "Get up, baby girl. Get up," he whispered desperately, but she only shook her head, wailing louder. The shame was too much. She could not escape it, not even beneath her veil. Then Harold stood. His stature was still broad, still commanding, but his spirit had caved in. He reached out as if to speak, as if to defend himself, but the words choked in his throat. His eyes, once proud, always steady, were now glossy, darting around like a hunted animal. His voice cracked when it finally came. "Darius, son, it's not what it looks like." The crowd roared in disbelief. People hissed. Some turned away in disgust. Others glared at him with the cold fire of betrayal. "Not what it looks like?" someone shouted from the back. "It's right there on the phone." The sanctuary buzzed like a hive, anger and pity colliding. Guests began to stand, some shaking their heads, others muttering prayers under their breath. What was meant to be a celebration of love had dissolved into public disgrace. Lorraine, seated in the second pew, crumpled forward. Tears poured down her cheeks, staining the silk of her dress. She rocked gently, her hands pressed to her temples as if trying to hold her world together. My God, what have you done, Harold?" Her voice was hoarse, broken, torn from the depths of a woman watching her marriage unravel in front of her entire community. Her daughters flanked her, one holding her hand, the other rubbing her back, their own eyes filled with tears. The Mitchell family, once the model of Atlanta black excellence, was now on full display as fractured, betrayed, undone. In the pews, guests scattered. Some hurried toward the exits, shaking their heads, unwilling to watch the wreckage unfold. Others lingered, whispering, "Did you see that? It's going to be all over the news. Lord have mercy, their name will never be the same." Phones filmed, fingers typed, text threads exploded. By the time the first guest hit the sidewalk, the scandal was already leaving the sanctuary, spilling into the streets, racing through Atlanta like wildfire. And in the middle of it all, Darius stood tall. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He didn't crumble. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his suit, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Every gesture said, "I am free now. This is no longer my burden to carry." He turned from the altar, his back to the wreckage of his father's shame, his mother's tears and Jasmine's sobs. He began walking down the aisle. Guests parted like water before him, some lowering their eyes in respect, others reaching to touch his arm in silent solidarity. Each step echoed with finality. Each step was dignity made flesh. Behind him, Harold's voice cracked again, desperate. "Darius, please, listen to me." But the plea never reached him. Darius didn't turn. He didn't need to. His silence was his answer. As he reached the great wooden doors of the church, sunlight poured through the stained glass above, washing over him in gold. He paused, just for a moment, letting the warmth strike his face. Then, with steady hands, he pushed the doors open. The chaos stayed behind him. The whispers, the sobs, the collapse. It was no longer his to hold. Outside, the Atlanta air felt different. Fresher. Lighter. A world waiting, untainted by the lies he had just shed. He walked into it like a man reborn. And inside Ebenezer Baptist Church, the family he left behind was drowning in a storm of their own making. The story left Ebenezer Baptist before the guests did. By the time Darius crossed the church steps, Atlanta already knew. Screens lit up across the city as messages flew. Screenshots, whispers, live posts from stunned attendees. A single QR code had turned a private betrayal into a public firestorm. Twitter exploded first. Hashtags trended within minutes. Hashtag Mitchell wedding, hashtag betrayal at the altar, hashtag Harold exposed. Some posts were shocked, others gleeful, some mournful. Videos of Jasmine collapsing in her gown, Harold's hollow stare, and Darius's steady walk down the aisle looped endlessly across feeds. Facebook groups lit up with debates. He was right to expose them. He should have kept it private. That poor mother. Instagram Reels carried split screens, half showing the wedding programs with QR codes, the other half showing guests gasping as the evidence loaded. TikTok stitched together clips, creators narrating over dramatic music. This wasn't just a wedding. This was history in Atlanta's Black community. The fallout was merciless. Jasmine Turner, once admired for her ambition and beauty, found herself jobless by the end of the week. Her firm issued a statement about moral integrity and community trust. Colleagues unfollowed her, her name whispered with pity or disdain. In one clip that went viral, she was seen leaving her office in sunglasses, dodging cameras, her face streaked with tears. Harold Mitchell fared no better. The empire he had built over decades, contracts, partnerships, influence, crumbled like sand underfoot. Board members resigned. Business allies distanced themselves. Churches where he once sat on the front pew quietly revoked his invitations. Newspapers ran headlines, respected businessman's legacy tarnished by scandal. And Lorraine could not bring herself to forgive. She filed for divorce within weeks, the papers delivered with shaking hands but steady resolve. She was tired of being a prop in a marriage held together by appearances. For once, she chose freedom over facade. The Mitchell home, once a mansion alive with gatherings and laughter, grew silent. Curtains stayed drawn. Harold's car sat idle in the driveway. Neighbors whispered as they walked past, shaking their heads. But Darius, he carried himself differently. He walked through Atlanta with his head high, his shoulders squared. People stopped him in grocery stores, in gyms, even at the airport. Some offered condolences, some offered respect. "You did the right thing," a young man said, shaking his hand. "You showed us what strength looks like." For Darius, strength wasn't in revenge anymore. It was in surviving the storm with his dignity intact. He threw himself into his work, his projects, his discipline. He didn't need to chase clout or defend his choices. The truth was defense enough. What mattered to him now wasn't what had been lost, but what he could build from the rubble. Still, there were nights when the weight pressed heavy. Nights when he sat in his Buckhead condo, bourbon in hand, staring at the city skyline. Nights when memories of his father's laughter or Jasmine's smile stabbed like blades. Nights when he questioned if exposing them was worth the scars it left behind. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered Lorraine's tears in that pew. He remembered the whispers that nearly swallowed his family's name whole. And he knew, silence would have been the true betrayal. The fallout hadn't broken him. It had forged him. Let me ask you, if your father betrayed you in this way, would you have done what Darius did or handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is the kind of wound that shapes a lifetime. The air in Houston carried a different weight than Atlanta's. It was wide, open, endless. Skyscrapers rose above highways that seemed to stretch forever, and the city pulsed with energy that felt new, untouched by his family's shadow. Darius stood at the window of his new office, the skyline glowing under the evening sun. He had accepted the position weeks earlier, senior director at a rapidly growing tech firm. It wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to redefine himself, to rebuild a life away from whispers and scandal. The move had not been easy. Atlanta was his home, the soil that held his roots, the city where his father's name still echoed in every boardroom, every church, every headline. But staying meant living in a cage built from memories. Moving meant stepping into freedom. He chose freedom. His condo in Houston was smaller than his one in Buckhead, but it felt lighter. No ghosts lingered in the corners. No echoes of laughter turned bitter. Each night, he unpacked slowly, methodically, setting up books on shelves, framing photos of his mother and sisters, choosing not to hang a single picture of Harold or Jasmine. One evening, as he poured bourbon into a glass, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his chest tighten. Dad. For a moment, he considered letting it ring. He thought about the chaos of the sanctuary, the implosion of their family, the silence between them since that day. But something in him, curiosity maybe, or a sense of duty, compelled him to swipe. Hello. The voice on the other end was not the Harold Mitchell the world once knew. It was softer, cracked, weary. Darius, son. I need to say this. Darius didn't answer, only let him continue. I was wrong. I was weak. I destroyed everything your mother and I built, everything I wanted for you. I betrayed you and I betrayed myself. His breath hitched. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you for it. Darius leaned back in his chair, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. Anger flickered in him, but it didn't consume him like before. Instead, he felt something else, Clarity. You're right, Darius said finally, his voice even. You don't deserve it. The line went silent. But, Darius continued, I'm not forgiving you for your sake. I'm forgiving you for mine. Because I won't let what you did keep poisoning me. I won't carry your sins any longer. You can keep your shame, but I'm walking free. Harold sobbed on the other end, a sound Darius had never heard from him before. Thank you, son, thank you. Darius closed his eyes, a strange peace settling in his chest. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't restoration. It was release. I've got to go, Darius said quietly. Take care of yourself. He hung up before Harold could reply. The glass of bourbon sat untouched on the table. For the first time in months, Darius didn't need it. He walked to the window again, looking out at the Houston skyline. The city lights blinked like promises, each one a reminder that his story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. He thought of Lorraine, who had finally found strength in divorce. Of his sisters, who rallied around her and found their own voices. Of Jasmine, whose choices had burned her path, leaving only ashes. And of Harold, a man broken by his own desires, left to wrestle with the ruins. But most of all he thought of himself, not as the betrayed son, not as the groom who walked away, not as the heir of a shattered legacy. He thought of himself as a man who had faced the fire and come out unbroken. He whispered to the glass, to the city, to the night itself, I am free. And in that whisper was not just survival but rebirth. Darius walked into Houston carrying no lies, no shadows, only lessons carved deep into his soul. His legacy was no longer tied to betrayal, it was tied to freedom. And in that freedom, his new beginning had already begun. If you've ever had to start over after betrayal, you know how heavy it feels at first. What would forgiveness mean for you? Not as a gift to the one who hurt you, but as a gift to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments, because this ending is only the beginning of the conversation.